Welcome to episode 5 of the EdUp Smart Space podcast. Hello, I'm your host, Craig Park. Today's program theme is how forward thinking human experience design strategies enhance learning and resilience in academic environments. My guest is Paul Chavez, an associate in user experience technology design at the international engineering consultant Arup. Paul is also a lecturer on human experience design interactions at California State University, Long Beach, and a well regarded composer and sound designer for music and dance performances. Welcome, Paul. It's great to see you again.
Thanks, Craig. It's really good to be here. Love to talk to you about lots of things.
Paul, you bring a unique lens to technology and campus design through your work at Arup and in your role as a lecturer at Long Beach State. Can you share a bit about your journey and current roles?
I started in this business in audio design for the built environment. I learned a little bit about architecture. As my career went on, I was designing technology. We started asking the question, why can't our clients use technology that we're designing? That led me to a decades long pursuit of what experience design is, what user-centered design is, what usability design is. At the time, it was in parallel with the web, something that spurred kind of design thinking and new ways of looking at developing technology. Of course, in parallel, the Macintosh had come out several years before. During this period, the iPhone comes out. Those set standards of design thinking and usability, and those have been incorporated into my thinking, as well as more advanced interaction in the built environment.
Excellent. How does Arup approach technology integration in academic facility design different from traditional models?
It has to do with that experience design approach, but there's two factors I think I would speak to. One is definitely not thinking about technology, thinking about the problems to be solved, designing to the capabilities of the user. One of my pet peeves is the use of the word intuitive, because ultimately what it is familiarity. Researching users and understanding what they're familiar with, what they use, what their technical capabilities are, and then designing the technology and understanding the technology that fills that role. More and more, I'm doing the upfront strategy and definition, and then all our incredibly brilliant technology people are designing the detailed systems. I'm thinking about and written about is the way all elements that go into a building aren't equal, especially temporally. Obviously, the foundation of a building and the walls and those sorts of things are going to be there for 20, 30 years or longer. But as you build up the sandwich of where the technology lives, you get shorter and shorter lifespans. And that's really important. And this comes back to the iPhone, especially when it comes to the actual interaction. You and I had a client one time that famously threw his touch panel, all because he was so frustrated with it. From then on, I started saying, the interface is the system. Everything behind the system doesn't matter to the user. The only thing that matters is what they interact with. And that layer of interaction is generally these days digital. Much like the iPhone that gets updates every 3, 6 months, buildings need that approach too, and have really yet to get where they're adapting in real, there's observation of how the building is being used, and then there's an adaptation on the digital side, which is absolutely doable. It's all programming. The interaction layer is software. It's not hardware. The hardware is part of it, supports it, but the interaction part happens in software. And that software really only has, 6 month, a year long lifespan before it gets old. Thinking about how do we maintain a building's software on an ongoing basis is a little bit different.
That's a very insightful. I know that one of my former cohorts, John Dale, is the president of the Council on Open Buildings. It's a group of architects who were founded a few years ago to address that exact issue, and particularly in academic environments. What kind of education projects are you currently involved in, and what excites you most about working in that space?
The thing that excites me the most is thinking about buildings as extensions of humans, and the thing that allows them to be capable of making decisions, of being creative, of building things. I think about the building as a prosthetic element to the human. What excites me about educational facilities is the idea of spaces that enable lots of different kinds of thinking. lots of different kind of interaction. Different ideas are going to be developed in different environments. The thing that often happens is that the classroom just gets repeated, the designs get repeated. That's okay, but thinking about it as a suite of different kinds of interaction is a more helpful way to think about it. Aside from this classroom fits 12 and this classroom fits 30 and this classroom fits 70, what happens in those rooms? I also guest lecture at USC, and the environment between Cal State Long Beach and USC can be really different. I work with graduate students at Cal State Long Beach, and of course, it's often in a more studio environment when I'm there and we have these one on one conversations. So the room is really just a bunch of tables, and people have their laptops out. And the key thing, maybe the general rule of educational facilities, is being able to share screens. And there's a number of different ways that we're doing that. But then I go to USC and the class is bigger, sometimes it's undergraduate, and I have to stand at the front of a lecture room. And I hate it. I hate it because of the political implications of a lecture room. I have learned that I have things to teach to young people,
Mhm.
but there's always like a relational learning that can happen, learning from the students, students learning from the sage lecturer. But the lecture hall impedes that kind of interaction because there's a certain amount of inhibition when you're sitting in the seats versus when you're standing on the stage or behind a lectern. There's a certain amount of respect and maybe too much status giving to the person in the front of the room. There's this dictatorial architecture, if you will, of a lecture hall. Sometimes I just want to hear someone speak, and that's an appropriate format. But what I'm talking about is that interaction implied by the architecture. One needs to understand the kind of interaction that happens in a certain configuration of a room, and the technology goes along with that because now we're mostly communicating with images.
And communicating live. What we're doing right now, that move from in-person interactions in the design process that we had up until COVID. And I have said in previous episodes that I think I designed my first video conference room in 1980 and lobbied for this as collaboration without travel, not because I don't like travel, but I like the convenience of not traveling when I don't need to, where my interaction as a technology advisor is relatively short in the overall meeting agenda. I'd much rather do this. But it took COVID for that ability to have a legitimate video conversation to take hold. We still complain about you're on mute or you turn your camera off because you don't want to be seen, sort of etiquette of conferencing. One of the things you said is really true. The change from sage on the stage to guide on the side, that move we see in the designs of more active, team based, flexible learning space where furniture moves, multiple screens, lots of flexibility in how things are configured for different kinds of teaching modalities, is the new way of thinking of
Yeah.
schools. When a client says, I need three 200-seat lecture halls, I immediately start to argue that's not going to serve them in the long term and in the 50-year life of this building, especially given the cohort of digital native students in the late millennial and Z and now alpha and soon beta generations coming into school.
Yeah, absolutely. The ways in which our, learning is happening is evolving. Not just in the last year, AI has made a big presence in my classrooms. Last year, it wasn't really present. And then all of a sudden,
ChatGPT was launched in November of 22, interviewed ChatGPT for an article in the APA Facilities Manager Journal, just out of curiosity to see what kind of answers that I would get in this kind of an interview process, but in print. And I'm about to update it because it was really interesting to see the difference between the responses I got in the fall of 23 to the responses I got now in the spring of 25.
wow.
Markedly better and certainly more astute. And one of the episodes, I'm going to interview ChatGPT and let it speak its answers
I
as
love
if
it.
it's here.
That sounds great. This last couple of months, I've been using a tool that ex-Twitter Reed Hastings developed called PI. It's personal information.
It's really an interesting transition we're seeing right now. We'll get to that more later in the episode. Why is it critical to involve technology consultants from the earliest stages of a campus planning exercise?
It relates to the digital native in that there's a very basic functionality that is required for any kind of interaction these days, but definitely for the working student. Um, and you can't get that right if you're applying onto architecture late in the game. I have different opinions about that layer, that digital layer. Definitely the infrastructure is absolutely essential with respect to power, rack rooms, conduit, all that. If you don't size your rack room properly and you don't provide the right cooling, you're lost. You're gonna struggle with certain technologies implementation. We don't even know how campuses might incorporate AI servers in the future and have their own AI services. One of my students was looking into dedicated AI to serve underserved students and finding information because his theory was that they don't feel comfortable asking sometimes for the right information. So he created a chatbot. The other thing, sometimes I feel like architects go too far in embedding technology into a building, that I think that it needs to look perfect and beautiful and integrated and all that. In my opinion, architecture that supports technology in the best way looks probably more like a black box theater than what we see in some of these architectural designs. And architects don't understand that life cycle thing. And a black box, especially in an educational environment, you want to be able to change the classroom to adapt to AI. What does the adaptation to AI mean? You can't do that if everything is embedded in the wall with a beautiful wood bezel and beautiful millwork and that sort of thing. I feel like portable furniture, portable technology is not a bad way to go in many kind of collaborative creative spaces. In that case, your infrastructure isn't ad hoc. It's not like you didn't put planning into it. It's just that you have to plan for that kind of technology approach.
Do you have a technology strategy that you bring to the table? Do you have a sequence of conversations with the planning teams? Because as Aeropa's engineers, you're working with other architects, other consultants in various disciplines, plus the client user groups and facilities representation. How do you structure those kinds of meetings to get the most from your input?
There's parallel things going on in most building designs. We have a lot of disciplines at Arup, and one is the telecom people are making sure those basics are taken care of. The connection to the internet providers, the master antennas that need to be put in, the rack and the cooling and all these things. So there's a certain amount of that is routine, but then that interaction layer is the one where I really need to dig into who the user is, what they do. How can we achieve levels of enjoyment and meaningfulness in the technology? How does it reflect the particular school and the particular pedagogy that happens in that school? One user interface, one interaction layer doesn't just work across the board.
Right.
So that's back to the layers as you get closer to the user, from the building to the user. That's when you need to incorporate their input, incorporate who they are.
Can you describe a project where Arup's technology vision transformed a student or faculty experience in measurable ways?
Well, the measurable part might be a little challenging, but go back to your COVID comment, which was this cultural mutation, if you will. What I was talking about as far as the politics of a lecture hall, now there's a big implication of the politics of hybrid learning, because what happens is the people on the far end that aren't physically in the classroom, if there's not really a big effort put into it, they become second class citizens. When they're seen, they're usually seen at a scale that is so different from the scale of real people in the room. You can think of it as you've got somebody 3 feet away from you that you're interacting with in a normal way, but then the people online are like 100 yards away from you, as far as the kind of information that you're gathering from their facial expressions and the nuances of communication, not to mention the body language. So all that said, we've made some seminar rooms, smaller rooms generally. I would say that video conferencing really starts to fall apart at about 12 people. It's really challenging. In order to even make 12 people work in a room or 16 people, we need to think about cameras more like we used to microphones, although our approach to microphones is changing. We used to put a microphone for every couple of people. Sometimes we still do that. I feel like cameras need the same treatment. A camera at the end of the room where the people at the far end of the room are 2 inches tall on the screen, it doesn't serve them. We've done several rooms now where we've taken a couple of different approaches. One is literally a camera on the table for every other person, and those cameras are switched based on the microphones. There's this interaction. We see that commercially now a little bit better, like the owl. We put
Mhm.
those in some seminar rooms, and they're frankly really good, but they only serve maybe a relatively small round table. When you get a little bit longer, now Logitech is taking this approach. I don't know if they've come out with it yet, but they were teasing being able to do multiple digital camera views on a table. That really is a very good approach because you get at least the biggest possible image of a person when they're speaking. It goes back to the display size. That's the other thing we've been looking at. How can we put displays so that they're also not at the end of the room and pulling attention asymmetrically sometimes. That may be okay to make the simile of if there's someone else at the end of the room, you're looking at them. So if you're looking at a screen, it's a similar kind of attention. We've done some rooms with displays on the long end of the table, both
Mhm.
forward and back, so that you're looking at people at the table. And when you're looking at the far end, you're just looking slightly above their head. That's the kind of minute interaction that is required to bring equity of the people on the far
Right.
end to a better level.
That approach to, and it's something we try and do. I'm currently working on a school of medicine that is wanting to have students in St. Joseph, Missouri, small cohort, 24 students who are connected to the Kansas City campus, have that same equitable experience. We're doing that same thing in terms of increased image size to boost those image of remote students to the far end students and vice versa. It means more screens. I'm looking forward to the day when DVLED truly is wallpaper. Literally, all the walls are screens with images wherever we need them at the scale we need them.
We're getting closer and closer. I just saw a presentation by one of my colleagues this morning. He went to Shenzhen and saw some new LED technology that can't seem to be getting to production level. One of the other things that I've done to give it more natural interaction is to put the people screen on one end of the room and the content screen on the other end of the room instead of the tried and true side by side. What it allows you to do is make this people screen up to the table, forego the chairs at the end of the table and put that
Mhm.
screen there so that the people on that screen are sitting at the table
And,
almost at scale, depending on
yeah,
how many
yeah,
people. That's the other
right,
thing. You
right.
don't want too many people on the far end because they get smaller and smaller. The camera on that people side actually gets to see the content that the people in the room are seeing. And it's a different kind of interaction for
Right.
sure.
You talked about it a little bit earlier, but I'll ask again, is what are the risks of siloed planning when AVIT and building systems aren't considered holistically with the rest of the design?
This is something that era really keeps in the forefront, and yet we still struggle with it because there is just a certain logic to having people of the same discipline work together. We solve that by changing the layouts of our offices so that the adjacent technologies like lighting and IT and AV are sitting next to each other. That makes for a lot better interaction than if they're in different buildings. Uh, the siloed disciplines uh, is the same as the siloed disciplines we see on the end user when they have like IT people and AV people and they're pointing at each other like this is what's wrong. The best projects are when our IT people and our AV people are on the same call, the same design calls. We have the same conversations with the client and we are pointed in the same direction. You and I having been in this business for so long, we keep seeing this convergence getting closer and closer, and yet it's still a separate thing. Maybe it needs to stay that way.
We keep trying, though. To your point, is I think bringing everyone that you can to the room to give an understanding of the big picture of what the project wants to achieve so they feel like they've been included with conscious inclusion in specific stages through the programming, schematic design, design development, construction document phase, rechecking on the process as we go along, lets them give us feedback immediately and helps us get to that stage of inclusion where they feel much more in the process.
Yeah.
So it speaks to the speed of change for both technology and pedagogy. I think technology is changing faster than pedagogy. How can institutions design facilities to stay relevant?
The thing on my mind is our ecological or climate situation. That comes to mind first. We need to consider how we connect people in classroom buildings better to our climate situation, whether that means having windows or having some kind of connection. What does it mean to push classrooms outdoors when it's possible? It seems like kind of a crazy idea, but I really think that it could make a big difference in the way we approach the climate, that we approach design, especially with students, a different effect on wellness of the students too, which I know we all think about.
I was wanted to talk about the relationship between technology and sustainability in part of the design. We talk about smarter buildings being able to react to different environmental conditions and adjust solar gain, turn off lights when rooms aren't being used, simple structures like that. Are you seeing a growth in the idea of what I'll call smart buildings, smart campus systems to meet sustainability goals as part of your engineering disciplines?
Our sustainability and engineering groups, which we have throughout our company, are some of the strongest, busiest groups. For good reason. They work towards the standards out there. The Lead and Well and Title 24 in California, they keep progressing, but they can only go so far at a time, and then they have the political, give and take, and so they can't move so fast. Well is a nice standard that is more human centered, which is good. But here's my real soapbox, if I haven't been on one already, which is all of this effort towards smart buildings is they inadvertently disconnect us from the environment. When you take a building and you make it completely autonomous and take all the responsibility for energy conservation, effectively takes away from humans. We need to put it back. We need smart buildings that do their best at saving energy. Then we need those smart buildings to communicate what's happening in the building so that humans can respond to it. Humans in the building need to know if they're using too much energy or too much water and act, not be treated
Mhm.
like they are being taken care of. We need to take
Right.
care. We shouldn't rely on the building engineers in the basement to take care. What it means is there's a lot of implications in technology design and smart buildings, where I think we can all agree that the people in a building are the smartest element of a building. So why not leverage them? It might mean bringing sensory information into the building that indicates the status of the building, like the complexion of a face. You see somebody
Mhm.
blush, you understand. How does the building communicate that? Maybe not just purely in numbers. Maybe it's not like using 300 megawatts of power right now. That's good, but we need it more like the way we interact with the sun, where we can tell time plus or minus a couple of hours. I need to be able to tell plus or minus a couple of 100 kilowatts what's happening in my building.
Well, there's a great interest now with the younger generations that are in school and coming into school about sustainability. And their interest, I worked on a campus in the Midwest several years ago that made a campus wide effort to put to your point, infographic style displays in every lobby about how that building was performing over time so that students could see that because they were curious and it gave them a reinforcement that the campus was making an effort to be greener, more sustainable in a way that they could visually see and it made them happy.
Observing that kind of thing is the first step. Like, as soon as you start to observe something, you start to get connected to it, right? Then there's something beyond that. Well, there's two things I would say. One is, what can they do about it? Do they have some form of autonomy to act if they knew that they could affect turning the thermostats up in the summer. The second thing beyond information is that they have a joint agreement as a campus to actually work together to go beyond those targets to how can we make this the most efficient campus in the world by working together. When you think about it, is the solution to the climate crisis. It's not going to be solved by buildings and computers.
Thank you. Looking ahead, where I invite you to be informed science fiction writer, answer the question, what comes after, what comes next? What emerging or experimental technologies do you think will have the biggest influence on the campus design in the next decade?
Beyond these communicative buildings, which I think is what's coming next and not definitely here today, the other, I think about cultural, is like I said, COVID and the iPhone was, you could say, a cultural mutation, something we didn't expect, and it took us off in a different direction. Social media probably could be called that. And again, in some ways, all three of those things went in directions that we didn't predict. And I think the next thing that could cause that, and predicting the future is folly, is AR glasses that provide information to you in real time. I don't think we've really explored the implications of that on our culture. Um, the other day, I saw somebody on the train who had the new X Real, I think they're called, glasses. And the guy was watching a movie and he was just like sitting there still looking forward. It was sort of creepy. I can imagine information can be provided anywhere, relevant, contextual information. And I can't tell, I really, how it's going to affect education. But I think it may, like teleconferencing is in some ways eroding the campus a little bit. It's probably somewhat of a negative effect on buildings. Before COVID, we had 350 people in our building, and now you're lucky to get 2 or 100 in any given day. So the same thing, I think maybe not as extreme in the campuses, but it's happening now with AR.
What one challenge or opportunity do you think higher ed leaders aren't paying enough attention to?
Comes down to student autonomy of using conferencing or remote learning, AI, and other technologies. They're pretty slow to react to that. We're in the midst of them trying to figure out how to deal with AI, but maybe they need some foresight to say this is a good way forward. It's hard for them. I understand. You're taking a whole different tangent with AI.
Well, thank you. Where can listeners learn more about Arup's work and your work in academic and technology forward environments?
Well, we have a constant stream on Instagram and LinkedIn. We have quite a bit of content online on our website. I haven't brought up our sound labs, but our sound labs are the laboratories where we do acoustics interaction. I just mentioned that because we use that for outreach and bring people to explore the kind of acoustical phenomenon that we're simulating. We're very open to bringing people in. We have a constant stream of students and visitors and clients and artists. It's an interesting kind of channel.
Sounds fun. I look forward to coming back to LA. And any final advice for institutions looking to align facilities planning with innovation, experience, and resilience?
Consider the building an extension of human capability, and that humans don't always aren't always looking for the same thing. They're looking for do different things. They're looking to make decisions. They're looking to be creative. They're looking to watch media, different activities. So as much as you can, you want a suite of a lot of different kinds of rooms that serve a lot of different kinds of thinking.
Great. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, as always. I enjoy our conversations more than any. I miss that we don't have them as often as we used to.
Likewise. Thanks for letting me talk so much. I appreciate the space.
You can also find more about Paul Chavez and his work on his personal website, Water Rock Studios at waterrock.org, and on the community blog site, medium.com, under the Arup Digital News channel, where he posted a fascinating article titled A Design Framework for Digital Buildings that speaks to the time relevance of the layers of interactions we have with the built environment. I'll include a link to the article in the episode's description, and thank you for listening. Please follow us on your favorite podcast channels and share our conversations with your friends and colleagues. And as always, thanks to the EdUp Experience Network for their support. You can learn more at edupexperience.com. Until next time, let's keep building smart spaces together.